So anyone who's seen Mike Judge's new HBO show, Silicon Valley, probably knows how great it is. And if you haven't, go and check it out. The thing that I love about it is not just the great script or the characters or the fact that it taps into how startups have really become part of mainstream culture, but because it's so believable. There's this fantastic scene where this geeky-looking kid gets up on stage at his funding party and he says, "A few days ago, when we were sitting down with Barack Obama, I said, okay, we're making the world a better place through constructing elegant hierarchies for maximum code reuse and extensibility." Now, this is all too real. This is why I started an agency that helps entrepreneurs. They're often creating technologies that are genuinely putting a dent in the universe. But all too often, they're terrible at communicating that to the world. Jerry Seinfeld had this fantastic quote from his stand-up routine, and he said, "It's amazing that the amount of news that happens in the world every day always just exactly fits the newspaper." But in one fell swoop, it captures how absolutely absurd the media industry had become. And it shows why they were ripe for disruption. So I want to tell you a little bit about how I've seen the media changing in the last 10 years, what that means for businesses trying to get into the media, and then I'll go back to what hasn't changed and what never will. So first up, we've got to go back about 100 years. It's around World War I. The big media certainly exists. You know, if you wanted to get into the media, it was very difficult, but the reward was huge. The newspaper was the central focal point in people's lives. We joke about how antisocial we've become on phones and tablets, but this is how catching a train used to look. Now, brands hadn't quite figured out at this point in time how to get into the media. There was no great PR industry. It didn't exist at all. But this wonderful guy called Edward Bernays came along, and he's the father of PR, and you can thank him for some of the lovely things you're about to find out about. So he combined mass consumer psychology with psychoanalysis. His uncle was Sigmund Freud, so you can have a think about how he was able to influence mass consumer behavior. And he had this client. It was a lovely brand that we all know and love, Lucky Strike. And they had a huge problem. About 50% of their potential market wasn't buying enough cigarettes. It was socially unacceptable at the time for women to smoke in public. So he hires 10 beautiful women, has them walk down the street in New York City during a massive parade, gives them their torches of freedom, and this at the time was quite confronting. He tells all the newspapers what's going to happen, and the next day, it's front cover on every newspaper around the country. Overnight, women smoking in public is socially acceptable, and Lucky Strike sales go like that. Now, this is all well and good, and the media didn't change drastically for most of the 20th century. Big media moguls came along, in bigger ways than ever before, but the fundamentals didn't change. I guess the average PR retainer in Australia at the moment is $12,000 per month that brands spend, and we all like to think of ourselves as savvy consumers that won't be influenced by what we read, but the fact of the matter is that this still happens, and people act and think differently based on what they read and learn and watch. So the internet did come along and disrupt this. The revenue model for media businesses was heavily reliant on one thing. So this is Marshall McLuhan. In 1964, he said, "The classified ads and stock market prices are the bedrock of the press. Should an alternative source of easy access to such diverse daily information be found, the press will fold." So he said this in 1964, and it took quite a few years for this to happen. The press has not folded, but it's absolutely been disrupted by this. The internet's made all this information freely available. So anyone selling their car, anyone selling their house, any sort of classified ads in the newspapers are suddenly online, and they're free or close to free. And the Australian media was massively at risk from this. So just 10 years ago, 56% of Fairfax Media's revenue was classified ads. This is compared to 18% at the New York Times and London Daily Telegraph, and 25% at the Chicago Tribune and LA Times. So the Australian media, the biggest media publisher in Australia, over half their business, their revenue, was from classified ads. And they're twice as at risk as the US companies. Now, the US didn't survive this change. They weren't as reliant on classified ads, but for every $1.50 that big newspapers in America lost in print revenue, they were only able to recoup 10 cents online. So they were affected in a big way as well. Now, what's happening at the same time is that absolutely anyone can be a journalist. So all you need is a $200 smartphone and a 3G connection, or in this guy's case, a dumb Nokia phone, and you can report on what's happening around you. So hands up if anyone's written a blog post, shared an opinion on Twitter, written a post on medium.com. Thank you, yeah, a few of you. You're competing with the big media outlets and you're actually impacting their business models. Now, what this means for brands that are hoping to get noticed, I think there's four main things that have changed as a result of this. So first is redundancies. So this is the Age down the road. They've just recently announced that they're going to get rid of a bunch of their photographers. The New York Times, the bastion of good quality journalism and the company that every other media company looks up to because of their digital publishing model that's sort of worked, just let go of 100 journalists. In 2013, the Chicago Sun-Times let go of every single one of its photographers and sent all of their reporters on an iPhone photography basics course. I organized an interview a few weeks ago for a client, and it was a pre-recorded TV interview. And the reporter came to where we were filming it, and I asked him when the rest of the crew was coming. And he said, "Sorry, I'm it." He literally had to set up the camera, do the lighting, do the audio, hit record, sit down, do the interview, and probably go away and record and edit it later. So journalists are hiring one-man bands. Editors are hiring one-man bands. Now, a big media outlet losing 100 reporters still has to put out the same amount of content. If you buy the paper for $1 or $2, you're not going to accept that it's 50% thinner because they let go of some reporters last week. So there's increasing pressure on journalists to get out this content, and it's becoming harder and harder. At the same time, it's easier than ever to start a media outlet. So you've got global media outlets that are starting that you'd have a situation where back in 1914, you might be running a PR campaign trying to get into 2 or 3 media outlets. You're now targeting 200 or 300 or more. So that's changing. Now, the media cycle used to be you'd have to file your story by the afternoon. By the early evening, it was off to the printers. After the editors had moved the pages around, and it was off to the printers. Then late in the night, around midnight, it was being loaded up into trucks and driven around suburbs and dropped off at your home. That's changing now. The media cycle is measured in seconds, minutes, hours. It's much, much shorter. So being first is much more important than being right or accurate or insightful. And no one remembers the second person to tweet about a plane crash. So the storytelling is getting faster and faster. And we are in this age of 140 characters. So storytelling has become more concise, and you really have to stand out to get noticed. The dull stories get forced to the bottom and no one reads them. So that's how the revenue models from the big media companies have been totally changed, and they've impacted it in a negative way. But one thing that's changed that has worked really well for them is that they're now global. So if you had a media company decades ago, you'd be targeting a 50-kilometer radius around your head office. Now you can target 2 billion people with an internet connection. So the media companies are global and they know it. And I've got a couple of stories from some recent media activity I've done that really highlighted this for me in a way that I hadn't even realized was happening. It might be obvious to say the media is global. You've possibly even read an article from a US media outlet before coming here today. But the scale and the frequency with which this happens is quite, I think, startling. So it was back in January, and we were at the Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas. So I was with my client, Kogan, and being a startup, we didn't have a fancy booth or a stand at the show. We did have a nice hotel suite, though, and we were launching this great new 4K TV. We invited journalists from all around the world to come and check it out. And pretty quickly, we had a line down the hallway of journalists waiting to check this out. And it felt like a bit of a rock star moment. It was quite exciting. And they came pouring in, and suddenly we've got the two biggest tech blogs in the world, Gizmodo and Engadget, battling each other to be the first outlet in the world to cover this TV launch. And I'm there thinking, oh, I'm gonna, the US media, I'm gonna have to, I know this isn't coming to the US straight away, I'm gonna have to come up with some sort of statement that makes it feel like maybe this TV is coming to America and make them feel like their readers will care about it. All I had at that time was the Australian and the US pricing for it. I told them that, they wrote it up, hit post. I was really surprised because they didn't even care about their US readers at this point in time. They were happy to write articles on something that would only affect and benefit their readers in Australia and the UK. So that was a moment where I realized that even the media outlets are realizing that their small percentage of their readers in Australia actually matter, and the UK and other markets. So this is Ben Duncan. In the late 90s, he decked out this Jeep with a satellite connection and some cool technology. It's got more tech than a modern car today will have. And you may want to heard him after I tell you this, but he was the guy who coded one of the very first versions of webmail. So if you ever had a great webmail experience, decades ago, it may have been him. So he drove around Australia for a year, literally all around the country, and while he was going, he was coding Atmail version 1. This is email software that is used by people around the world, and I'll come back to that in a sec. What's happened while the media's gone global, businesses have scaled and learnt how to take advantage of that. So you've got Atlassian in Sydney, which grew to $100 million revenue, a very small portion of that in Australia, with 0 salespeople. So business models are becoming scalable, and they're able to take advantage of this attention they're getting all around the world. So he was getting written about all around the world while he's driving around Australia writing this code. They've got customers all around the world. This business still exists now, and they're a small team in an office half the size of this, sitting in Phrygian Beach. Feels like the middle of nowhere on the Sunshine Coast. It's the best office you'll ever see. They can walk out their front door, and they're on the beach. And they've got 45 million people around the world using their software. So businesses are able to take advantage of this global reach from day one. Now, while the media cycles and businesses are getting faster and faster, the lifespan of media is actually changing. Today's news used to be tomorrow's fish and chips wrapper. You had one day to get ROI on a media campaign. If I'm launching something and Gough Whitlam dies that day, which happened to me a few weeks ago, good luck getting any coverage. You're not going to get the attention of the media, and that was it. It's all over. So what's really changing that is analytics. So we're able to now see that media stories that we place or secure or brands get into the media have a longer lifespan. So it used to be about one day, it's now effectively infinite. I've got a client that wrote just a normal guest article advice piece in a tech blog in the US 2 years ago that uses analytics to still track benefits from that today. They can see people coming in through that article, making purchases, and they benefit from it. So that level of analytics has changed. PR used to be about smoke and mirrors. It was, everyone knew it was great to have your name in the paper. There was a little bit of ego involved and it felt nice, but you really had no idea if it was working. I was at a big agency a number of years ago, and a lot of agencies still do this. It's called AVE. It's this total crock measurement. It's advertising value equivalency, and you would literally have to get the newspaper clipping you had secured for a client, figure out that it was 23 square centimeters, find out the ad cost of that position on that paper, on that page, on that day, and for God knows what reason, multiply it by 3.5 because they'd somehow figured out that an article was 3.5 times more trustworthy than an ad. And it felt disgusting. By the end of the week, you're telling a client, oh, I got you $3.2 million worth of media coverage this week. It was horrible. I knew that the client didn't have $3.2 million more sitting in their net bank than a week ago. There was this smoke and mirrors approach to PR, and that's changing. And this has only happened in the last few years, but it's a big shift. So the lifespan of content is changing, and it's all about sharing and search. So hands up if you've read a BuzzFeed article in the last month, whether it's Melbourne versus Sydney or cute cats, pretty much everyone. All right. But have you gone to the BuzzFeed.com homepage? They don't care about the homepage. It's all about searching and sharing. And this is why media has a longer lifespan than ever before. BuzzFeed talk about how they don't care about their homepage. They know it's a fraction of their traffic, it's irrelevant. So that's changing, and it's really created it's created a massive shift in how any entrepreneur, any challenger brand, any startup gets into the media and benefits from it for years to come. This is all about how the media's changed, and I think this has covered off, what's changed both in the last 100 years, but also the last kind of really short period of time. But there's a few things that have never changed and never will. So these are news values. There's a bunch of values that make up what the media will write about or talk about. And they're not values that sit by the desk of a journalist, that they get a story idea and kind of tick off these things. But it's what's in the head of reporters and in their gut. And it's what they see and they know, it's how they know they've got a great story. And people argue about the different number of values. Some people say there's 7 or 13 or whatever. I think there's 7, and I want to go through them really quickly with you. And this is, I guess, a bit of a blueprint about if you're doing something interesting and innovative and disruptive and you want to get the media to stand up and pay attention, fulfill some or all of these criteria, and they will. So the first is impact. Your local garbage pickup service going on strike is going to impact your life a lot more than your local cafe going on strike or the coffee machine breaking down. Timeliness. Yesterday's news is much more important than the news from 2 days ago. And in the age of digital storytelling and 140 characters, this is shorter and shorter. It's seconds now. Prominence. If some people call this celebrity, if Kim Kardashian walked into Melbourne Airport this morning, you'd be hearing about it in the news. But the fact that I flew in yesterday, no one gives a shit. Proximity. Now, this is going to sound incredibly morbid, but this is how the media works. If there was a flood and 10,000 people drowned across the other side of the world, that's about the same newsworthiness as 1,000 people dying on the other side of Australia, which is about the same as 100 people dying in your city or your suburb or backyard. So proximity really matters with news values. Bizarreness is interesting. If a dog bites a man, it's probably not going to be in the news and you won't hear about it. But if a man bites a dog, you'll probably hear about it. Sometimes people confuse currency with timeliness, but it's quite different. So this is, really tapping into trends that are part of public discourse, and, I guess it looks at a longer tail of relevance. And at the moment, there's obviously a huge Ebola outbreak happening. So any story about the hint of a virus outbreak or someone coughing on a plane is going to be much, much more newsworthy than it was a year ago. Now, these 6 news values I've showed you so far, they're really expensive for a brand or a startup or anyone to create. It's expensive to hire Kim Kardashian to plug your product. It's expensive to have proximity and have the good you're selling in every suburb or city or state or country around the world. But the one thing that's not expensive and exists in every business is conflict. My client, Ruslan Kogan, who you may have seen speak at a previous Real Big Things, has a great little anecdote about conflict. And he says, if Jack and John met at an event and went away, had lunch, and became Facebook friends, no one cares. But if Jack and John met at an event, maybe this event, went away and had lunch, and Jack stabbed John, you'll probably hear about it. I think, Apple is at various times, and I think today, once again, the biggest company in the world by market cap. And they're no longer, flipping the bird to IBM. They're no longer a challenger brand in the sense that they take on a bigger company. There's no one else to take on. But they are still a challenger brand because they take on the notion of boring design with everything they do. And I think this conflict is what helps anyone get noticed by the media. Any business that's still in business, any interesting project someone's working on, anything innovative, it's being done for a reason. It's being done to change the status quo in some way. And that conflict at the heart of everything everyone professionally is doing is what is the key to unlocking media coverage. Thank you.